This is Stupid Monkey Philosophy Live for Thursday, September the 29th, 2022. Doing a follow up. We're going to finish what we started last night. I was not able to make it through quite as much in that frame of time as I thought I would. Started getting a little ag back here. So, as it turns out, some of the work of John Locke's two treatises of government is a bit hard to swallow. It's difficult to read for various reasons, as we'll get back into. First, I want to talk about my day. I hope you all had a wonderful Thursday. The weekend's coming up right around the corner. We'll be doing another Patreon program tomorrow morning, and heard it on the news over at the Trusty 8 podcast in the evening. You have any time to spare with your busy Friday, go check those out. Let me get a little bit off of these topics briefly. Of course, we'll be resuming them very soon. Yeah, so my day was a little different. Today was different. I attended church for the first time in many years now. It was not a standard church service. It was actually a recovery program run by the church, but it is a Christian recovery program. It's not a secular or even a like deistic type of recovery program. So that was interesting for me. So I wasn't just an attendee, right? I did have my own motivations for being there. One being that I had some community service hours to do. This pastor was willing to sign off for my community service hours in exchange for some labor and my attendance, of course, which was fine because I'm going to be laboring somewhere, and I figured since I was arrested for a drunk in public alcohol charge, essentially, it would make sense to spend those hours in a place that focuses on people generally recovering from drugs and alcohol. Of course, the other motivation there is my mom's been trying to get me to come out with her, and she attends regularly, so it was a group that she attends as well. So she got to finally introduce me to her church friends and stuff. It was pretty laid back. They were doing kind of an 10-year anniversary thing for their particular group. Just had all the former congregation and leadership all kind of get together. There was a big barbecue. They had a live band and testimonials and stuff. And there was a communion afterwards, which I found interesting because I thought communion tended to be a Catholic thing, which I haven't done that in a lot longer than I've been to church. I haven't done that since the last time I was at a mass. A Christmas mass, one of those ones. That was many, many years ago. And I went with a person who is no longer amongst the living. I have that memory to hold on with them. Neither here nor there. I'm going off on a tangent. So it was a weird experience. I'll say I was not converted. And I didn't flaunt my position. I was obviously not extremely enthusiastic about the religion, but I didn't step on it either. But I did engage in a conversation with a guy, and I also realized for a lot of these people who are in recovery, this becomes kind of um, their what's the word I'm looking for. I think they trade substance dependence on this religious dependence. Most of these people are working people. They're not, invested too much in the philosophy behind things and stuff. So it's a very, new age kind of Christian environment, but they're also very focused on the Jesus. Christ is God, God is love, Christ loves everybody, etc. And so one guy, when I did mention that I, wasn't a believer, was just, I had to reiterate several times that, the only way, it doesn't matter if you quit doing drugs and alcohol forever, you'll never be truly recovered, according to their programs. Many people reiterated in their testimonies, if you don't come to Jesus. And so for that reason, I think it's interesting. It's obviously not a program that would necessarily work for me on the fundamental level there, as long as I don't find Jesus. But the people were uh, easygoing, easy to tolerate. They weren't uh, super evangelical or anything like that. Um, and it seemed like something I could learn from, almost in a way, to be able to, unfortunately, to find bad arguments from these kind of newer Christian apologetics, not so much the Old Testament fundamentalism, but this very um, uh, more homocentric, I guess, way to look at the Bible. That if it wasn't homocentric before, obviously, but it's God loves you, God loves everyone, God loves everything, and all of that good stuff. So you have to field like this whole different kind of set of arguments. But on the other hand, when you get into these conversations and you realize for someone like myself, that you could, possibly really mess this person's world up, mess their head up by disturbing their worldview at that point. Because, well, if there's no Jesus, I have no reason to not, delve into all this other self-destructive behavior, and then you have to deal with that person, right? Or it may even be, you know. So it tends to make people that way, one way or the other. Because if you don't get to them, then um, you're disrespecting their Jesus, right? But if you do get to them, then you have to figure out how to undo the the nihilism that becomes inherent in that. For somebody who has no other moral or philosophical foundations, and it takes really years to study this. I myself am lucky because as um, a social anarchist that I was, um, I did not have a moral foundation, and I had a good friend of mine, JD, who's now deceased, who really, really pounded a lot more philosophy into my head, things like Marcus Aurelius and stuff like that, and really got me back into actually trying to understand these things several years ago. And I'll say, philosophy, if you don't have um, a theological or religious foundation, philosophy in the broad sense is your next step. Just, look at how various people think and have thought throughout history. These once all these concepts kind of start to amalgamate in your mind, there's much better retention for logical arguments and much better critical thinking when reviewing those arguments. Although it's not perfect, you still have to study proper logic and critical thinking skills, to be clear. But it gives you, if all you've ever been exposed to, I think, is religion, the next thing you would want to show somebody is something like Marcus Aurelius, something like um, I'm not sure if like Socrates would be appropriate at that point. Obviously, anything that is overtly pagan or polytheistic is going to be problematic for them. So they're going to need something more in the ways of secular philosophy, which I'd say we have no shortage of, even dating back to the Greeks. I can't think of a really secular Greek philosopher off the top of my head, but I'm sure there must be one. Um, Let me know if you know in the comments below. But we're going to read from a not secular, not Greek philosopher, John Locke. We're going to just jump right into it. I went with this one live. Generally, I'm not doing this will be like a special thing, but it is broadcasting live now, though it is late on Thursday. Usually, I do these backstage on my own, and then the first one I did and the prototype that failed, which you don't know about yet. Okay, so trying gonna do these backstage and then just release them, so I wouldn't have the distraction of live chats and stuff like that. And now they're open to patrons, so patrons get these from anywhere from one to uh, from an hour to a day before the public, depending on whether I have to do any editing or whatever. So the way this is working out. And now, if we do Stupid Monkey Live, we will have open chats and open rooms for patrons. Patrons are invited to Stupid Monkey Philosophy chats. It's a pretty small group at this point. If anybody shows up, I will probably just throw the link into the live chat. Since we only have 9 folks subscribed to the channel right now. So definitely shill this out if you're finding it interesting and you think other people will find this interesting. I promise we are going somewhere. We're reading some thick text, but I have like a bunch of ideas, and I thought this would be a really good launching point. I may have been mistaken, but I'm going to stick with it. And we'll talk a bit more probably in the next episode about the various directions this channel will go exploring these concepts and how we're going to go kind of haphazardly jumping throughout different types of philosophy, different schools of thought, different eras. So John Locke is an Enlightenment thinker from, I don't remember the year, but late 1700s, I think. So you have to go brush up on that because I did the bio in the first one, and then I don't have it up with me right now. It is still in my Google Docs notes. But I didn't pull all that up because I was kind of doing this a bit haphazardly tonight. And we're going to start doing some weekly meditations. Marcus Aurelius, I think, is one of the most important and influential works that anyone's ever written. And you can find people like Locke and people like Cont and all types of more modern philosophers who are constantly cribbing from Marcus Aurelius, whether they realize it consciously or not. He had so much insight. So that being said, we're going to go back to Locke here now and talk about it more later. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. I just need to change my screen. Got this set up, blown up pretty good. I think you guys can see that, right? So Locke here has been spending a great deal of mental energy performing acrobatics, quite frankly, in essentially making an argument for why it is acceptable for the colonists at the time to take more land than was allotted to them, what they called wasted land, from the indigenous peoples in the Americas. And he is championing expansion. 45. Thus, labor in the beginning gave a right of property. Wherever any one was pleased to employ it upon what was common, which remained a long while, the far greater part, and is yet more than mankind makes use of men at first, for the most part contented themselves with what unassisted nature offered to their necessities. And though afterwards, in some parts of the world where the increase of people and stock, with the use of money, had made land scarce, and so of some value, the several communities settled the bounds in their district territories, and by laws within themselves regulated the properties of the private men of their society, and so by compact and agreement settled the property which labor and industry began. So Locke's argument is once capital is introduced and these nations have been established, at this point the practice has evolved. But in the Americas, they don't do this, right? The indigenous Americans do not even understand this concept. Or we can't say they don't understand it. I mean, it is literally in conflict with their ideology. Okay. and the leagues that have been made between several states and kingdoms, either expressly or tacitly disowning all claim and right to the land in the other's possession, have, by common consent, given up their pretenses to their natural common right, which originally they had to those countries, and so have, by positive agreement, settled a property amongst themselves in distinct parts of the world. Yet there are still great tracts of ground to be found, which the inhabitants thereof, not having joined with the rest of mankind in the consent of the use of their common money, lie waste, and are more than the people who dwell on it do or can make use of, and so still lie in common, though this can scarce happen amongst that part of mankind that have consented to the use of money. I think this has really backfired on Locke. This concept, they have no idea how expansive this land is, right? He's just saying, well, it could be endless for all we know is that there's a bunch of it that they're not farming on. And he doesn't understand that the concept of keeping the common territory was done intentionally by the natives. It was a part of their practice because they witnessed over farming and over hunting in their smaller bands, right? And we didn't even truly understand the vastness of the actual uh, peoples, right? Because we never saw them in large groups because they generally tended to keep it that way. And this is a cultural practice. This was a philosophy, albeit an unwritten philosophy for the most part. Um, excuse me. 46. The greatest part of things really useful to the life of man, and such as the necessity of subsisting, made the first commoners of the world look after as it doth the Americans now, are generally things of short duration, such as, if they are not consumed by use, will decay and perish of themselves. First necessity of subsisting. So I guess he's just saying, harvesting from the natural landscape rather than to grow a crop of a thing, right? Which wasn't necessarily true. They did grow crops. They only grew small crops, and then they rotated where they grew their crops. So they didn't continually plant the same land over and over again, which actually ruins the soil, which is true. Now, they were, devoid of certain scientific advancements that we had. But rather than, introduce them these scientific advancements to try to compromise, we were merely trying to shovel people over there. And Locke is advocating for this very hard. And considering this is everything he has to say about property, it comes from the Bible. And I don't know whether Locke ever visited the Americas or whether he's just conjecturing based on things he's read or heard. It's not clear to me yet. It's something we'll have to look into. It would be an important fact. Excuse me, that was necessary. Gold, silver, and diamonds are things that fancy or agreement hath put the value on, more than real use and the necessary support of life. Now, of those things which nature hath provided in common, every one hath a right, as hath been said. Fancy or agreement, oh, yeah, they did. They're like bright, shiny objects that we, can't. It's really hard to do stuff with, but we like bright, shiny objects, which shows you the group mentality of all of these people, right? Why was gold valuable? And it wasn't until we literally mined all the gold that anybody ever asked that question. It's crazy. Not literally mined all the gold. Obviously, you know, being facetious. There is still gold out there. We got most of it. Okay, now of those good things which nature hath provided in common. See, and the problem here is Locke doesn't seem to have any moral opposition to this. He's just like stating it. Well, this is just what people do, so let's just go with this, right? I guess it's kind of it, I don't it lacks any introspection into the concept, right? And that's a lot of the problem with much of what he's saying here. He's not providing really evidence. He's just saying, well, this is what people do, and this is what people say, and this is what the Bible says. Now of those good things which nature hath provided in common, every one hath a right, as hath been said, to as much as he could use, and had a property in all he could effect with his labor, all that his industry could extend to alter from the state of nature, had put it in, was his. All those things. Right. Okay. He is merely elaborating the earlier point that if you get there first, you take it and you make it better than it was, then it's yours. So if I find a stick in the woods and I whittle it into an arrow, that is my arrow. He that gathered 100 bushels of acorns or apples, and thereby a property in them, they were his goods as soon as gathered. He was only to look that he used them before they spoiled, else he took more than his share and robbed others. Reiterating more of his earlier points. Greediness is bad, okay? And indeed, it was a foolish thing, as well as dishonest, to hoard up more than he could make use of if he give away part to anybody else, so that it perished not uselessly in his possession. These he also made use of, and if he also bartered away plums that would have rotted in a week for nuts that would last good for his eating a whole year, he did no injury, he wasted not the common stock, destroyed no part of the portion of the goods that belonged to others, so long as nothing perished uselessly in his hands. Right, but again, now you're trading the small good to the actual land, right? And I'm going to argument for the fact that nobody in our societies claim this land, even though the people live there now. Like, they're not rational according to us because they don't do things the way we're doing. Note they never did this to like Asia, right? They did to Africa in a way, but in a much different way. But this is a totally new philosophy that John Locke is like just dancing around to try and make this work. And it almost it sounds good when you read it like this. Like you have no historical perspective, no introspection on your own culture, and you're just like, well, dude, we learned to till the land first, and look, there's a bunch over there, and they're just wasting it. They're just wasting it, bro. Imagine what we could grow on all that land. Okay, we continue. Again, if he would give his nuts for a piece of metal, pleased with its color, or exchange his sheep for shells or wool, for a sparkling pebble or a diamond, I don't know why I pronounced it that way. That was really weird. My mouth is doing strange things. And keep those by him all his life, he invaded not the right of others. He might heap up as much of these durable things as he pleased, the exceeding of the bounds of his just property not lying in the largeness of his possession, but the perishing of anything uselessly in it. 47. And thus came in the use of money, some lasting thing that men might keep without spoiling, and that by mutual consent men would take in exchange for the truly useful but perishable supports of life. 48. And as different degrees of industries were apt to give men possessions in different proportions, so this invention of money gave them the opportunity to continue and enlarge them. I can't say in this statement 47. I want to go back because I feel like I have some objection to how capital came to be. I don't capital in many cultures was actually not like gold was a later thing and silver was a later thing. Early on, yes, metals were valuable, but really only if they could be fashioned, because you could make the same tools from stone, which everybody already knew how to do, right? So it was only when these metal tools, which seem more durable and somehow more industrious, right? So metallurgy is one thing. So metal on its own, prior to gold and silver, you have the Bronze Age, Iron Age, all of that good stuff. It becomes a form of currency, but it's only fashioned metal. You can't just you can give somebody ore, but it only means something to them if they know how to fashion metal. And I think the gold and silver were merely kind of shiny objects that at the time were already somewhat formed and much easier to fashion and much shinier, right? So you had that type of capital, but people were trading like shells for goods and things like that. They were pretty shells, but they were just seashells, and they were found in abundance, relative abundance, but somebody went and gathered and hoarded them, like specifically for this purpose, which is a kind of a weird practice if you think about it. But there were a lot less people, right? Because a lot of abundance began to arise merely because of the practice of trade and then metallurgy in a different way. Um, so when you call that just, I think that so oversimplifies the point of how currency came to be a cultural norm for us. It has taken so many different shapes, and that's one, 2 sentences. Okay, 48. We'll just start over. And as different degrees of industry were apt to give men possessions in different proportions, so this invention of money gave them the opportunity to continue and enlarge them. For supposing an island separate from all possible commerce with the rest of the world, wherein there were but 100 families, but there were sheep, horses, and cows, with other useful animals, wholesome fruits, and land enough for corn, for 100,000 times as many, 100,000 times as many, but nothing in the island, either because of its commonness or perishableness, fit to supply the place of money. So none of these things are fit to supply the place of money in Locke's view here. But what they forget is if you just introduce money there, then you have a trade system, which is what we do with countries that don't, whatever. It's probably after Locke's time. Continued, what reason could anyone have there to enlarge his possessions beyond the use of his family and a plentiful supply to its consumption, either in what their own industry produced, or they could barter for like perishable useful commodities with others? Where there is not something both lasting and scarce, and so valuable to be hoarded up, there men will not be apt to enlarge their possessions of land, were it never so rich, never so free for them to take. So, an admission of guilt? It sounds like an admission of guilt. These are also just these like 100,000 acres, 10,000, or 100,000 acres of excellent land. He's just throwing numbers into the ether. Um, 49. Thus, in the beginning, all the world was America, and more so than it is now. Is this. I don't know if this is actually the purpose of this treatise or he's just using it as a comparison, right? The information they were getting was horribly flawed propaganda. They didn't even have this type of information, I wouldn't think, by the time this was even published. Um, just a little check here. Oh, 1689, dated 1690. So no, there's no way he had that type of information. So he's getting this all from the early colonists, and everything that they're telling them is being embellished by the crown, right? Everything's much bigger in the than it really is. to these people they think they're dealing with. Except, anyway, I guess it is relatively large in reference to England, but we're in comparison. 49. Thus in the beginning all the world was America, and more so than it is now. For no such thing as money was anywhere known. Find out something that hath the use and value of money amongst his neighbors, you shall see the same man will begin presently to enlarge his possessions. 50. But since gold and silver, being little useful to the life of man in proportion to food, raiment, and carriage, has its value only from the consent of men, whereof labor yet makes in great part the measure, it is plain that consent of men have agreed to a disproportionate and an equal possession of the earth. I mean out of the bounds of society and compact. For in governments the laws regulate it, they having, by consent, found out and agreed in a way how a man may rightfully and without injury possess more than he himself can make use of by receiving gold and silver, which may continue long in a man's possession without decaying for the overplus, and agreeing those metals should have value. 51. And thus I think it is very easy to conceive without any difficulty how labor could at first begin a title of property in the common things of nature, and how the spending it upon our uses bounded it, so that there could then be no reason of quarreling about title, nor any doubt about the largeness of the possession it gave. I mean, I tend to agree with Locke in this respect. In the most natural state of people, if I put in the effort to till the land, and plant the crop, and then you come along and steal all my fruit or whatever, I'm probably going to be pissed off. But then there is a reason to quarrel about it, right? And I'm like, that's my fruit. But you're obviously the thief here, right? And Locke's already told me what I should do to thieves. I should kill them, right? Because they took my fruit. Um, Do animals do this? No, because animals don't till their own fruit. They don't claim possession of things, not generally. They claim possession of territories, and those possessions tend to be transient. Most animals with long enough lifespan to rival us or outlive us are usually transient species, or they move extraordinarily slowly. In contrast, right? It's one or the other. Um, we're the only one who think we should have one territory for the most of our lifespan. That's only us. There's no other animal that tries to do that I'm aware of, or very few. It may be a very few, and again, those ones probably have very short or very long lifespans, one or the other. So there's like these polarizations of the way organisms live and interact in the ecosystem. All right. Right and conveniency went together, for as a man had the right to all he could employ his labor upon, so he had no temptation to labor for more than he could make use of. This left no room for controversy about the title, nor for encroachments on the right of others. What portion a man carved to himself was easily seen, and it was useless as well as dishonest to carve himself too much or take more than he needed. So greed and waste are bad, okay? And I can respect that. I agree with those. I don't agree with the reasons Locke uses to get there, but I agree with him in principle. It makes sense. All right, at 35 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and take two. Take two. Be right back. Put up a banner in case anybody comes by. Nobody wants. Give me a moment. And shill. I don't think anybody has wrenches here, but if you do leave a comment, I can give you a wrench. And we're back. Take a special moment to thank Secular Pagan Mom. Shout out, uh, number one patron, and a great friend, an ally in the community. Always very supportive, always very positive, encouraging me to branch out and try and make new content and stay involved with other people's content, and just an all around great person, a great friend, excellent trusty ape. All right. So I decided, the next one is probably going to be too long for tonight's stream um, on paternal power. So we'll save that for the next one, and we'll go back and do this little review of Locke's little chapter on slavery here, because it is quite brief, quite brief. Disappointingly, not too much to say about slavery, and a whole lot to say about how much land we get to take from indigenous peoples who don't farm and conduct industry the way that we do. Um, Real quickly, I know this was a little impromptu. We're going to have to get used to the schedule and stuff, but I'm always open to having dialogues as well on this channel. It's, in a big way, it's going to be me discussing, studying, and discussing and engaging with these various concepts and texts from different peoples. But I also want to engage in more fundamental ideas, and with modern peoples, with other individuals. That's the goal. I think philosophy at its core is a way we perceive and engage with the world, right? And so, what's the point if you're not engaging with other people? Um, I guess is what I'm saying. So that is definitely something that's going to be coming about. I don't know whether it'll be open rooms or probably select people that I'll invite and try to pick certain topics for panels on here. But if anyone's interested or has an idea, just reach out to me. If you don't know how to get a hold of me, stupidmonkeyphilosophy at gmail. So we go back. We read this one as well in the stream before last, but of slavery. This is chapter 4, so just jump backwards instead of forwards. 21. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth. The natural liberty of man is to be free of any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man. Of man, remember that. But to have only the law of nature for his rule. This is a very important passage. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but to have only the law of nature for his rule. The liberty of man in society is to be under no other legislative power but that established by consent in the commonwealth, nor under the dominion of any will or restraint of any law, but what the legislative shall enact according to the trust put in it. Okay, so this is not a man, but a group of men. A group of men may do this, and this is natural, according to Locke. This is not incongruent with nature. If a group of men, even though if an individual man tries to rule another man, right? I guess it's the Commonwealth, because they're Scottish and British and whatnot. I think they're still one nation at this point. I don't know. I'm going to skip over this. I'll do something on Sir Robert Filmer later, too, because we don't really know too much about this character. And Locke tends to disagree with him a great deal and cite him a lot. But freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and made by the legislative power erected in it. Freedom of men under government, right? So this is not natural freedom, but under the the circumstances that groups of men come together to create a commonwealth and a power of government, they may legislate. Okay, right. So we followed all that. A liberty to follow my own will in all things where that rule prescribes not. A liberty to follow my own will in all things where that rule prescribes not. So it does not prohibit. I always get prescribe and proscribe. If you prescribe, no, wait. Let's make sure we got this right. We're going to look it up again. If we prescribe, okay, no, so prescribe that's the thing that you actually do order it to do. So proscribe is the thing that is prohibited, which makes sense because of the root pro. Okay, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I always get those confused. Not to be subject to the inconstant, uncertain, unknown, arbitrary will. Wait. But if the rule prescribes not, it proscribes, it prohibits it. I need to. Why do they talk this way? A liberty to follow my own will in all things where that rule prescribes not. Or that rule says no. Not to be the subject to the constant, uncertain, unknown, arbitrary will of another man, right? It's not one man, it's like all of us got together and agreed on this. As freedom of nature is to be under no other restraint but the law of nature. Yet this is not really the law of nature. This is still the law of men. It's just the law of a group of men instead of one singular man. But as we know, a bunch of people can still be wrong. 22. This freedom from absolute arbitrary power is so necessary to and closely joined with a man's preservation that he cannot part with it, but by what forfeits his preservation and life together. So I guess Locke's justification here is because there was some regulation for slaves, and technically by the law they couldn't necessarily be killed, even though the law didn't work. Right, where they shouldn't have, by law. So they were protected by the government in Locke's view here. Then that's okay. As long as they're still protected by the government and their preservation of life, this is how the whole, and I see now how this whole thing kind of builds up. Okay, as long as we don't kill them unnecessarily. But if we can find as many reasons to kill them as possible, like stealing fruit, then whatever. Fucking white people. Continued. For a man not having the power of his own life cannot by compact or his own consent enslave himself to any one, nor put himself under the absolute arbitrary power of another to take away his life when he pleases. For man cannot having the power... Why do you not have the power of your own life? I don't understand that passage. It just doesn't make sense to me. Your life belongs to God or your life belongs to the society, it doesn't belong to you, then how are you autonomous? If your very life doesn't belong to you, then how is anyone autonomous? Because Locke was in favor of autonomy, right? But you have not the power of your own life? Okay, nor put himself in the absolute. Nobody can give more power than he has himself. Right? And he that cannot take away his own life cannot give another power over it. But you can take away your own life. You can off yourself. A lot of people have. Okay. Indeed, but it's just that seemed obvious enough to me. I don't know how that wasn't. This is just gobbledygook. Indeed, having by his fault forfeited his own life by some act that deserves death. He to whom he has forfeited may, when he has him in his power, delay to take it and make use of him to his own service. So if I should have killed you for stealing that fruit, but now I'm going to make you my slave instead. He does him no injury by it, but he says he's delaying to take it. So he is. He may be doing him injury, like working him to death or some crazy, like working him and torturing him. So none of that. That was just nonsense. You're just making all kinds of assumptions. For whenever he finds the hardship of his slavery outweigh the value of his life, it is in his own power, by resisting the will of his master, to draw on himself the death he desires. I was watching the interviews the Thinking Atheist did with Dr. Josh regarding his books and stuff, and Dr. Josh brought up this really great point about how ancient law was just so, it seems so barbaric, like the eye for the eye. But in reality, you use that as leverage. And they say, well, you took out my eye. You either want me to poke out your eye? How much is your eye worth to you? How much money do you have in your pocket? And, if you can like put a dollar amount, and obviously you could raise that up as high as you want, in the monies of that times. And then you're like, okay, well, my eye is worth this much to me. And if you don't have it, then you can be my slave. And then you're just, he's got you for 6 years or whatever the law was in particular points of time and stuff. So that was the idea, that if you took this thing from this person and you didn't want to give the same thing in return, well, would you rather, work for me for a few years or lose your friggin' left eye or whatever it was? And it's like, what kind of choice is that? Okay, well, I guess I'm working for you. But then once you come into that guy's power, he has like the right to beat you and all this crazy shit. He can, give you a woman and you'll end up, sleeping with her and having kids, and then he'll keep your kids, or you can stay and work, it's horrible manipulation tactics. And it's not well thought out. This is why legislation has to be well thought out. We can't rely on flimsy philosophy like what John Locke is providing us here. It's not good. It's not good at all. In many regards. 23. This is the perfect condition of slavery. This statement alone tells us how bad this is. This is the perfect condition of slavery. There's no. Slavery and autonomy do not mesh. Slavery and liberty, they don't mesh. There is no good condition or perfect condition of slavery, which is nothing else but the state of war continued between a lawful conqueror and a captive. And I understand this statement much better now. The state of war continued. So where a battle would have taken place, now instead you've conceded, you've been conquered, right? You are their captive. He said, shit, I took out your eye. I don't want to get my eye taken out. I'd rather work it off. And which makes sense to some degree, but again, where's the margin for human manipulation? How much is your eye worth, and how much harm is really done them? Maybe they're just I don't. There's such a gray area. It is so vague. It is so vague. But I know that the word lawful conqueror is just problematic in itself. Conquest is not like, so if you're saying you've vanquished your foe in battle, okay, fine. But then at what point do you have the right to enslave them? No dividing. It's just a blanket statement. If we fought and I beat you, your ass is mine. For if once compact enter between them, and make an agreement for a limited power on the one side and obedience on the other, the state of war and slavery ceases as long as the compact endures, right? And again, this sounds great. Idealism. Well, limited power on the one side and obedience on the other, cool, and everything's cool, right? I'm not going to beat you. You're not going to try to run off because you're my slave. But that's as long as the compact endures. Now, this This is supposed to apply to like slavery in the Bible. This has nothing to do with antebellum South slavery and stuff like that, because that hasn't really occurred yet. I mean, slaves are being taken there, but the whole debate hasn't happened yet. They're just kind of importing Africans here and there when they can. I think it was pretty. I think it was around the same time period. I'm not entirely. I should actually probably not say that. I know that for certain, but I believe it's around the same time period when they just kind of start quietly bringing the boats over. Which I don't know, again, if Locke would have had a way to know about that. I'm not sure if that was kind of a backdoor deal that certain parties pulled, or if it was really known to the common English folk. Okay, we'll continue here. For as has been said, no man can by agreement pass over to another that which he hath not in himself a power over his own life. So if you can't preserve your own life, then you can't. You keep saying it, it does not begin to make sense. I guess he's saying at this point the guy had the right to kill him and he spared his life. So therefore he owes him the debt, but he doesn't have the ability to make agreement. Unless baffled. Completely baffled by what Locke means. If anybody knows, please let me know. I confess we find among the Jews as well as other nations that men did sell themselves, but it is plain this was only to drudgery, not to slavery. So they worked for really low frickin' wages. Sounds like capitalism to me. Continued. For it is evident the person was sold not under an absolute, arbitrary, despotical power, for the master could not have power to kill him at any time, whom at a certain time he was obliged to let free out of his service, and the master of such a servant was so far from having an arbitrary power over his life that he could not at pleasure so much as maim him, but the loss of an eye or tooth set him free, as it says in Exodus. Yeah, and yeah, so Locke is using the Exodus there. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these arguments were used by the South during the Civil War or those debates or talks or what have you. And that's as far as we go tonight. Going an hour, not bad, not bad. Started a half hour late, ended a half hour early. However you look at it, stupid monkey philosophy coming at you. As I said, Patreon tomorrow it'll be popping. I'm gonna do some reviews. I'm not telling who yet. I'm probably gonna do a couple. I've got a couple videos in mind. No cringe watching, unless there's like something really noteworthy from one of those characters over there. I've been thinking about looking at some whacking atheist, just to see if I can ruffle some feathers there. When Kent has his call-in line and stuff, that could be fun. Could call in and harass Kent Hovind one of these days. It'll be great. I don't know. All ideas, all things in the pipe. Like the marijuana I'm about to smoke. Have a great evening. Have a great Friday. And be safe out there. Stay trusty. Don't be a stupid monkey.